a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. At least 16 files disappear from the US Department of Justice's public webpage, posting records related to late financier Jeffrey Epstein less than a day after they were released, including one containing a photograph showing President Donald Trump. Democrats note photo of Trump apparently removed from Department of Justice release of the Epstein files. The missing files, which were available on Friday but no longer accessible by Saturday, included a photograph of Trump alongside Epstein, Melania, and Epstein's longtime associate Ghislaine Maxwell. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's not sure if a Ukraine-Russia-US meeting would help. Says only US can persuade Russia to end the Ukraine war after US offers new talks format including Russia and Ukraine. The renewed fighting between the Southeast Asian neighbors of Cambodia and Thailand this month, including with tanks, drones and artillery, has killed at least 22 people in Thailand and 19 in Cambodia, according to officials. The United States intercepts an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela in international waters, a move that comes just days after US President Donald Trump announced a blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers entering and leaving Venezuela. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva says that an armed intervention in Venezuela would be a humanitarian catastrophe in the face of escalating action from the United States towards regional neighbor Venezuela. Australian Prime Minister orders review into police and intelligence agencies after Bondi attack as Sydney residents honour Bondi victims on National Day of Reflection. Google announces that its Gemini AI platform will fully replace Google Assistant on Android devices in 2026, pushing back its earlier timeline to allow for a more seamless migration. The change will affect Android phones, tablets, and even the standalone iOS app, which will be phased out once Gemini takes over. Let's start with the top story now, this one from the United States, where Department of Justice has released thousands of documents related to late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, and the files were filled with names of world's most famous people, including former President Bill Clinton, Michael Jackson, and Mick Jagger. However, there was one notable exception in the file, that of US President Donald Trump's. While Democrats have noted that one photo of Trump has apparently been removed from the Justice Department's release of Epstein files, Democrats also say that one file with photo of Trump appears to have been removed from the initial data set that was released by the Justice Department. Additionally, the media has reported that at least 16 files have disappeared from the Justice Department's website. Meanwhile, extensive redactions and the limited number of documents released related to the Epstein case has angered some Republicans and has done little to diffuse a scandal that's threatening the party ahead of 2026 midterm elections. The Trump administration touted this week's release of a cache of Epstein-related files as a show of transparency, but a handful of Republican lawmakers and right-wing media figures joined Democrats in blasting disclosures as inadequate and possibly in violation of a law that prompted their release. And I'm now joined in by Matthew Wadham, who's an American journalist, and he joins us from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Matthew, for giving us your time and speaking to us at this hour. Matthew, it's startling that some 16 files have now just disappeared from the website of the Department of Justice, including one of Donald Trump. What do you think could have really happened?
Okay, but just before I do that, I just want to say, apologize. On the show last night or yesterday, I misspoke. I said the Department of Justice was withholding files related to the Epstein Island flight logs. I was incorrect. The department, the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, specifically said they are not withholding them. Anyway,
All right,
now
thanks.
it's apparently. Thank you. I had to get that out of the way because after I said it, I realized I was wrong. The apparently some file related to President Donald Trump was posted on the Department of Justice Epstein Transparency Act website, and then it disappeared, and there has been no helpful explanation yet for what happened. So we're just going to have to wait to see what happened. The all of the files were supposed to be um, made available online by yesterday. That is December the December the 19th, and now the Department of Justice is treating that as if that was actually the beginning of the date when they were supposed to disclose the files. In fact, that was the final deadline, as some Democrats have been pointing out. Some Democrats are very upset about in Congress are very upset that the not all of the files have been dumped online yet. In fact, one of them, Congressman Ro Khanna, a Democrat, has said he's considering filing articles of impeachment against U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi for not getting all of the files online in time. Now, we don't know for sure what the delay was caused by, but there was a report before the deadline day, before the 19th, from CNN indicating that, based on anonymous sources, of course, indicating that the Department of Justice didn't have enough attorneys working on the redaction process, on screening the photographs and files, and that they just could not get it together in time. In fact, they were pulling National Security Division, they were pulling attorneys off of other cases so that they could focus on this, and there still wasn't enough. And some attorneys were being asked, to deal with 1,000 files at a time, which is, quite a burden, especially, when you're dealing with attorneys, and attorneys never, they get paid by the hour. They never move quickly. So, and they also, the necessity, they don't move quickly because they have to make sure that they're complying with the law. The law allows redactions when, like, no one is supposed to be redacted. No files are supposed to be redacted just because the subject is, rich or famous or powerful. But there are supposed to be redactions when a victim is shown or mentioned in the file, or when it could have an impact on an ongoing investigation.
Right.
So you can see how this might take a lot of time. However, legally, that's no excuse. Everything was supposed to be done by December the 19th, and it wasn't. So the question arises then: what can people who are upset about this do? They could sue, and if it's by the time it gets through the courts, this whole thing could be resolved and everything could be out in the next few days or next few weeks.
Sure.
Or they can take more drastic steps, as Congressman Ro Khanna of California, the Democrat, has suggested, impeaching Pam Bondi. That seems like a rather extreme step to take for a bureaucratic screw up like this. But people are upset because they were promised that everything was going to be made public by a deadline imposed by a federal statute, a law passed by Congress, and it has not happened. So people are complaining, and I'm not sure. I don't know how many more photos or files are remaining. From what I saw, all I saw were pictures of some famous people, like the late singer Michael Jackson, and former President Bill Clinton swimming in a pool, and and him wearing a fancy silk, Italian-looking silk shirt with Jeffrey Epstein. I didn't see anything that looked particularly incriminating, and people are also wondering, when are they going to see, this is tabloid fodder. People are wondering, when are they going to see pictures of rich and powerful people making them look bad?
Yeah.
That's what people want to see. They want to see the
Matthew,
mighty and
but
powerful
right now
brought
the
down.
question is the fear that some Republican critics are having about incomplete disclosure of these files ahead of the midterm elections, midterms next year. Do you think it is possible that one of the 16 files that had Trump's image as well, which was removed, could it be keeping in mind the midterms next year? Is that possible? I mean, there are no definite answers, but is that a likelihood?
I don't think it's going to cause, Republicans to lose the midterm congressional elections, if that's what you're referring to. But it certainly does not make Republicans who are associated with the Republican President Donald Trump, it does not make them good. It does not make the public trust them more. And this was an issue that they campaigned on, and their side is not delivering the way the public looks at it. So yeah, there could definitely be some blowback. Would it be enough to cause a few congressmen or senators to lose their seats? I kind of doubt that, but it's possible, and it definitely is not helpful for Republicans. And Democrats are going to be screaming about this for the next 11 months, I'm sure.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Matthew, for joining us and explaining all that to us. And with that, viewers, let's now move on to some more news from the Americas. And now, U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has said that the U.S. has intercepted an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela in international waters, a move that comes just days after U.S. President Donald Trump announced a blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers entering and leaving Venezuela. It's the second time in recent weeks that U.S. has gone after a tanker near Venezuela amid a large U.S. military buildup in the region. Meanwhile, the Venezuelan government has denounced the seizure of a new vessel transporting oil, describing it as a serious act of international piracy. Caracas says the actions by U.S. will be reported to the United Nations Security Council, other multilateral organizations and governments. All right, I'm now joined in by Dr. Asta Chadha, who's an associate professor of international relations at Ritsumeikan University, and she joins us from Tokyo. Thank you very much, Dr. Chadha, for joining us and for being available for a discussion here at NewsX World. Now, Dr. Chadha, as many are criticizing, is this just an attack on illicit smuggling of narcotics to the US, or on oil tankers that are sanctioned, or is it really an attack on the current regime in Venezuela with an attempt to rather overthrow it?
Thank you for having me for this discussion, Kriti. Like you mentioned, this is a multifaceted issue. This does not directly only address US concerns over narco-terrorism. That could be one angle, but there are several aspects to the story, right? So US seems to be acting as a regional policeman. It's using its coast guards, it's using its military, it's trying to physically enforce economic sanctions through a maritime blockade. And there are three major US strategic interests that emerge from this. One is, as President Trump has mentioned, he's fighting a war against narco-terrorism, but also he's trying to, fight a regime change or bring about a regime change in Venezuela. And US claims of Venezuelan oil revenue funds, it's not so much just about the oil tankers, it's about what that oil is supposed to be funding. And the US claim is that it funds narco-terrorism, right? And so US thinks by cutting off this lifeline of Venezuela, US could force Nicolas Maduro out of power. But then there's a second angle to this as well. The seized vessels are reportedly, or were apparently, some of them were bound for China. And US looks at China as a strategic rival in the wider Indo-Pacific. And China's influence in the Western Hemisphere has been increasing over the past few decades. So this seems to be, for the United States, is one way to signal to China that US has still not given up its regional hegemony, at least in its own strategic backyard. And then lastly, this is something that President Trump mentioned during his campaign as well, specifically when he said that US should try and keep oil as compensation for alleged Venezuelan theft of US assets. So this is again one of those moves by US to not just try and remove Maduro administration from power, to try and seize Venezuelan ties with Iran, China, or any strategic rivals of United States. And also, in a way, it is trying to signal to its own public that, we are seeking return of assets and resources that were American or that have American interests in those.
All right. Well, thanks for your perspective there. We do continue to stay on with us as we move on to some news now coming out of Europe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said the United States is proposing a trilateral format for the Ukraine peace talks that could take place in Miami shortly. Zelensky has added that the main parties involved in such a meeting, a joint meeting, will be the US, Russia and Ukraine, but some European delegates could also possibly be present. Let's listen in.
Що стосується мирної угоди, Умєров мав вчора розмови, всі більші деталі у мене буде трішечки сьогодні пізніше. Дійсно, Сполучені Штати Америки сказали, що у них буде окрема зустріч з представниками Росії, і вони запропонували такий формат, наскільки я розумію, Україна, Америка, русські, так як там є і представники Європи, напевно, і Європи.
The Ukrainian president has rather expressed skepticism on this trilateral format of talks, saying he is not very sure that anything new could come out of it. But Zelensky still has reiterated some of his previous comments, saying he believes yet that only the United States is capable of persuading Russia to end the ongoing war, and that there could be no alternatives to replace the US as the principal peace negotiator in Russia-Ukraine talks. Meanwhile, Russian President's special envoy Kirill Dmitriev has reportedly arrived in Miami, where he is scheduled to meet Trump's US President's special envoy Steve Witkoff and son-in-law Jared Kushner. And I now request Dr. Chaddha to join us back in the discussion here. She is an associate professor of international relations in Kyoto. Thanks for staying on with us, Dr. Chaddha, once again. How do you respond to Zelensky's statement that's come out? Do you agree that a trilateral talk involving all three parties and the negotiator is really going to be helpful at all?
Well, thank you again for having me to discuss this very important issue. I mean, see, we need to look at it from two perspectives, right? One is what President Zelensky is expressing as his anxiety of what could happen in the future. And the other one is his immense trust and confidence in the United States being able to negotiate a peace deal. So let's address, why he thinks US. I mean, if you look at both in terms of intent and capabilities, US currently stands as the only international mediator that could potentially bring this conflict to an end. One could only guess, whether it's going to be a permanent end to the conflict or a break for a timing, but at least United States, has maintained its position on this war as to, it needs to end sooner. And, and US is planning to act as the guarantor of peace too, in that regard. And then thirdly, the aspect of, US wanting to reduce its own financial and military burden because, we've seen that US has consistently provided support to Ukraine in its time of need. Now, the question is, why is President Zelensky so skeptical when it comes to this? I mean, it seems like if you follow what he's been saying for a long time, he's been wanting a defining end to the war. He wants a very dignified peace wherein, he wants to hold Russians accountable. He wants return of abducted citizens. He wants legally binding US security guarantees. And also he does not want to give up the land. Yeah. And if you look at the President Trump peace plan, pretty much, a lot of disagreement that he still has is on what part of Donbas region would be under Russian control or what part of the acquired territories would continue to be under the Russian control. And that is one thing I think that holds him to take a step back from his full commitment to the Trump peace plan. Now, him thinking that this trilateral format might or might not work largely stems from this anxiety as to whether or not, Ukraine could really push President Putin to, accepting any more difficult terms than Russia would be willing to accept. Because ultimately, if you look at it, it's ultimately going to be, again, a discussion between the United States and how much leverage US can have over Russia, or vice versa, in terms of agreeing the terms of peace. So why he thinks US can persuade Russia? I mean, precisely because, US has the economic and military weight, which currently Ukraine does not have. And he thinks that Putin, or President Putin, might really feel the pressure if US puts its foot down and asks for, I don't know, if US is willing to respond with something like total sanctions, or some sort of a military advancement, some sort of a military weight within Ukraine in order to push Russia back, or in order to deter Russia from further military action. So I think those are the combination of things that President Zelensky is probably looking at when he says that trilateral format might not work. However, he feels US is in a position to negotiate better with Russia.
Yeah, but if we've, for anybody who's been tracking the developments as far as the talks are concerned, they would tell you that Trump's approach has constantly been swinging, to either sides. So even if he's, not sure about Trump really, pushing forth Ukraine's demands, as has recently been seen with the statement that he's running out of patience with Ukraine and asking Zelensky to hold polls. But at least there's European Union. At least, that those members from the European Union states in the negotiations would only speak for Zelensky. If that is the case, then odds are rather in favor of Zelensky. So we don't know why should he be in fear of talks going the Ukraine way.
I mean, it's a good question that you raised, but I mean, let's understand the reality. The EU, even though it has been united and has put a united front in favor of Ukraine against Russia, there has been little that has come out in terms of lasting peace. And, in the past few years, specifically since this conflict started in February 2022, the only time we've seen Russia and Ukraine kind of trying to agree close to, 80% of what could be the future peace future peace process, or the future peace deal, what it could look like, is a result of what President Trump had earlier, tabled, which meant even though there would be, security guarantees, and yet Russia would be allowed to keep certain territories, and they could use it as a economic buffer zone, so on and so forth, which President Zelensky is not very happy about. So in none of these do we see coming out of purely European negotiation. It is precisely because US is stepping into this role of being a negotiator, is stepping into this role of talking it out, diplomatically rather than with any other force, though, one could argue that economic sanctions are force enough, but we've seen economic sanctions alone have also failed to work. So given in light of that, I think President Zelensky is sounding more, I would say, pragmatic when he says that probably if it were to be left alone to Europe, we don't know how long it would take. It could end up in peace, but we don't know how long it would take. And at this point, US seems to be President Zelensky's best bet. That is, if President Trump were to be able to do a dialogue that allows somehow Russia to accept giving up the territories it has controlled, though that is a big question mark as it stands.
Fair, sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Chadha, for joining us in this discussion. And with that, viewers, we're now going to move on to some news coming in from South Africa, where at least 10 people are dead after unknown gunmen opened fire in a township near Johannesburg. Police say another 10 people were injured in the attack. The shooting happened in Bekkersdal, about 40 kilometers southwest of the city. Police say the attackers fled the scene and no arrests have been made. Authorities say some victims were randomly shot in the streets. The motive for the attack remains unclear. Investigations are underway to identify those responsible. And now moving on, a federal aviation safety investigator has said that a passenger texted emergency landing shortly before a Cessna private jet crashed and burned in Statesville, North Carolina, killing all 7 people on board, including former NASCAR driver Greg Biffle and members of his family. NTSB board member Michael Graham also said the jet had been equipped with a black box, which was not required, and said it had been taken to NTSB headquarters in Washington for analysis. The plane crashed about 10:15 local time on December 18 at Statesville Regional Airport. The plane had been bound for Florida, but soon after takeoff attempted to return to the North Carolina airport. Let's in fact listen in to what the board member has said.
I also want to clarify a question I received yesterday about a potential text from a passenger on board the aircraft. This morning, I can confirm that the NTSB is aware of one brief text from a passenger on board the aircraft to a family member that read, and I quote, "emergency landing." Again, that's emergency landing. We are not aware of any other communications from passengers on board the aircraft to those on the ground.
Let's now track some tech news coming in. Google and Apple are warning some employers on US work visas to avoid international travel. The advice follows visa stamping delays of up to 12 months at US embassies. Business Insider reports the warning is based on internal company memos. Immigration lawyers say new social media screening rules are driving the delays. They warn workers risk being stranded outside the US. The advisory covers H-1B, H-4, F, J and M visa holders. Some embassies now have year-long appointment backlogs. The Trump administration has tightened H-1B vetting and added a $100,000 fee this year. The program is widely used by tech firms hiring talent from India and China. Google and Apple have not commented. Alphabet issued a similar warning to staff last September. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.